rarely talk about politics on this channel, at least directly, for a number of reasons. It doesn't interest me terribly. I find politics exceedingly boring for the most part. I don't enjoy it, and I also think it's basically pointless. But sometimes it is important to talk about certain things. And sometimes it's important because there are political decisions that are made that have dramatic effects on your daily life and, in this case, your safety. So the images you're seeing here are images of the NYC, New York City, subway system. And the people you see there are the American National Guard. So the long and short of this is that the New York City subway has become so dangerous over the last few years, with all manner of incidents ranging from people being pushed onto the tracks and being terminated in this way, to robberies, to drug-crazed, mentally ill people, which is a daily occurrence there, to you name it. The only way to make the subway quote-unquote safe, which it probably still isn't, to be perfectly honest, was to call in the National Guard to literally guard the subway against criminals, vagrants, and dangerous people. This is on top, of course, of the New York City police. Now, in addition to all of that, what's become very common is turnstile jumping. If you've ever ridden the New York City subway, at least back in the day, you'd have to put a token in or run a card through it. And many people don't even bother. They just hop the turnstile or otherwise find some other way around it, which then costs the taxpayer tons of money because you then have all these other law-abiding citizens who are actually paying for the subway fare. And what does New York City do in response to this? Well, they're thinking about taxing citizens in other ways to make up for all the criminals. In addition to this, I'm sure you've heard that New York City is experiencing a lovely wave of third world immigration that's been unprecedented in recent decades in a very uncontrolled manner, specifically in comparison to, say, 10 or 15 years ago. 15 years ago, New York City was one of the safest cities in the entire country, which is astounding if you consider the size of the place. It is the largest city in the United States. And not too long ago, there was an incident in Sweden. A man was taking his 12-year-old son swimming on a weekend, and there were some hooligans there in the swimming hall. And the man politely asked the hooligans to cease and desist and stop harassing him and his son. And the hooligans did not reply by ceasing, desisting, or excusing themselves. They pulled out a pistol and shot the man and terminated him on the spot in front of his 12-year-old son. And these are just a few incidents of the many incidents that are ongoing in both Europe and the United States due to various moronic policies that have been implemented. So in the case of New York City, one of the main reasons why, for example, the subway has become so dangerous is because the judicial system has been altered very thoroughly, where you have the situation of repeat offenders being released again and again and again. And I'm not referring to repeat offenders who stole some candy or lollipops necessarily, but actual hardened criminals that have engaged in violent crime. They've assaulted people, they've stolen things in a violent manner, and sometimes even worse. And they are released, and to everyone's surprise, apparently, recidivism is a thing. And so what happens? They commit a crime, they're released because of New York State's, and specifically New York City's, retarded policies when it comes to this. And guess what? They commit crimes again. And what's also interesting is the people who typically jump the turnstile are these recidivist criminals. In Sweden, over the last 10 to 15 years, there have been unprecedented numbers of migrants and immigrants from the third world, very often let in an uncontrolled manner. And now Sweden has the highest rate of gun violence in all of Europe, and some of the highest crime rates in Europe. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, Sweden was one of the safest countries in the world, and one of the safer countries in Europe. Now it's the opposite. Now, these are not one-to-one policies here. What happened in New York is slightly different from Sweden. But they're all really dumb policies, unintelligently crafted policies that were produced by people who were ideologically attached to certain ideas, who got lost in ideological fervor. They created this situation. They've made countries and cities very unsafe. And this is where the rubber meets the road, to be perfectly honest. Like I said, I'm not super interested in politics. But when I notice that people I know or care about are being affected directly by some of these policies, as was the case with my father, who was violently assaulted by hooligans in New York City, and this is a man well into his 80s, then I start to develop an interest in this stuff. And this is the point that, of course, I'm driving at. For years, we've heard about how everything is fascist, and how anyone who's even slightly to the right of the most far-left thinking is a fascist, and the fascists are coming, and that Trump is a fascist, and I don't particularly care for Trump, for the record, but that he's a fascist, and that in Germany, for example, the AfD are fascists, or that the Sweden Democrats now have a position of power in Sweden, and these are the guys who are referred to as far-right or fascist. All these years you've heard about fascists left and right. Now it seems like the chicken is coming home to roost. I don't think, for the record, that any one of these individuals or groups are actually fascists. I think fascism is a term that is, to be perfectly honest, antiquated. It applied to certain areas of Europe and South America in the early 20th and mid-20th century and doesn't really have an application anymore. But the problem here is the blindness of the ideologues in question. Because here you have them pushing for policies that have made cities and entire countries noticeably more dangerous to the populace. People are concerned about their safety, literally just about their safety in many cases, not even for an ideological reason. They just don't want to be robbed or jumped or shot or executed, right? They just want to be able to ride the subway and not be harassed nonstop, or pushed onto the train tracks, or stabbed, or anything that involves violence. That's all they want, which is my position, really, overall. And then you have certain individuals and certain parties that claim, at least nominally, that they might be offering answers and solutions to this by reversing certain policies, by changing certain things. And what happens? People, above all on the left, cry, fascism. The fascists are coming. They push for all the things that have resulted in this insane situation we find ourselves in the West, specifically in the United States and Europe, and then are mind-boggled that average people start voting for parties that are noticeably more right, that don't like what's going on, and they're so blinded by their own ideology that they have failed to notice that inasmuch as this actually is happening, that is, right-wing parties being voted in various places, and the push against certain policies, they're so ideologically blinded they cannot even realize for themselves that this is a perfect case of a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you change the basic existence of human beings in places that used to be safe and okay, and that people could go about in their daily lives unhampered, unimpeded, and you turn it into a dangerous situation just by going to the store or riding the subway or going swimming with your son, you don't really have a right to be surprised when people start getting really upset about this, and people who are very normal, not extreme, start voting for quote-unquote extremist parties, quote-unquote far-right parties, quote-unquote fascists. And as I said, fascism doesn't really exist anymore. It is an antiquated political ideology that existed in the early and mid-20th century. But you get my point. This is all self-made. This is all a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everything that people on the extreme left have been pushing for seeming ideological reasons, maybe also for economic reasons, although in the case of New York City, I am 99% sure it is pure ideology. Well, they've made their bed, and now they have to lie in it. And the fact that people are fed up and don't want to deal with it anymore surprises them, and they in turn conveniently label these people fascists or far-right activists or people in the far right, people who just want to go about their business and not be harassed or assaulted or murdered. Well, I don't know what to say to that. Most people are not extreme. They really aren't. They're not even political. They're just going about their business, doing things in their daily life. Maybe they have families, maybe not. They're just taking care of their business. If you throw obstacles in the way constantly, and by the way, it's not just New York City and Sweden. I could talk about places in Paris, Brussels, Baltimore. Ever hear of Kensington Avenue in Philadelphia? It looks unironically like a zombie apocalypse. It is the drug addiction capital of the United States. More dangerous than you can imagine. The people there actually look like zombies. This has been allowed to happen. So yeah, normal people are beginning to vote for things that are unsavory, potentially, and there's no one to blame but the left-wing ideologues that push for this forever. Again, I'm not particularly political. I generally regard myself as quite centrist on most issues. But when it comes to outright danger, risk, and all these other things, that matters to me. I like the fact that I'm able to walk around still at night and not worry about getting jumped where I live. Hopefully it stays that way. The same I cannot say for the New York City subway, or any public park in New York City, or really any street in New York City. And there are far more dangerous cities in the United States. St. Louis has a murder per capita that is comparable to some of the worst countries in South America. Bad policies, really bad policies brought about by ideology. And then they wonder why the quote-unquote fascists are coming. Well, they've made their bed, and now they need to lie in it. As always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons and donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. You are like an unstoppable force out there, keeping the channel alive in light of it being shadow banned and beaten into oblivion by YouTube. Many, many thanks again. As for everybody else, if you can leave a like, comment, share, subscribe, all that usual YouTube jazz. Who knows, maybe it helps. Much appreciated. I'll check you out next time. May the gods watch over you. Until then, if I'm still alive, bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.